Hi, Subhash sir. Thanks for joining the Atman Show, episode 18. And Subhash Kak is an Indian American computer scientist and is the professor of computer science department at Oklahoma State University, Stillwater. In 2019, the government of India awarded him Padma Shri for his contribution of the history of mathematics, science, ancient astronomy, and philosophy of science. So, sir, can you go ahead and complete your introduction for my viewers of the Atman Show?
Yes, delighted to be a part of your show. I have been teaching for many, many years in the US, and I work on not only computer science, but I've also worked on history of Indian literature, especially the sciences. And as far as computer science is concerned, I work both on AI and quantum computing and their impacts on society.
Okay. So, sir, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to ask you some questions related to science and things like that. So, my first question, I know you have written a book on, Vaisheshika Sutra. I saw it in Amazon, but I did not get a chance to read it. But on my first slide, so I have a question like J. Robert Oppenheimer. He said during World War II when he invented this atomic energy, and then he said that now I become the death, the destroyer of the world, quoting the Bhagavad Gita after witnessing the first nuclear explosion. So everybody thinks that he's the pioneer in atomic science, but why do not know Kannada, Maharishi Kannad, and do you have any comments on that one?
Well, J. Robert Oppenheimer was talking about Krishna, Sri Krishna, speaking about his Vishwarupa, and he says that I can also be death because that's part of reality. But as far as atomic power is concerned, that is very recent. Atomic power, that is nuclear power, is very recent. But as far as the concept of atoms is concerned, that goes back in Western science, maybe a couple of 100 years. There was a fellow called Dalton, I think John Dalton. And there may have been some speculation even amongst the Greeks. But now the idea of atoms in Kannada's Vaisheshika Sutras, which according to scholars is maybe 500 BCE, if not earlier, is really very old. And it's not just the fact that you thought about atoms. Since that perhaps one can arrive at by saying that, well, if you keep on breaking something up further and further, dividing something up further and further, at some point you might come to the smallest size, and that's an atom, right? That's the naive way of looking at it. But what Kannada did in his Vaisheshika Sutras, he created an amazing structure for physics. First of all, what he suggested was that everything in the physical universe is a consequence of different substances or different based on different kinds of atoms and their properties and their motions and nothing else. So that's very impressive. And then he also said that as far as we human beings are concerned, we interact with the physical universe, and based on how we interact, we either get some universals, that is universal knowledge, or particular, which is Vishesha. Universal is Samanya, and the particular knowledge is Vishesha, which is where Vaisheshika comes from. And third is the way we interact with it is called Samavaya. And that makes us access only one of the many different possibilities, which is again something related to one of the ideas in quantum mechanics, which is the foundation of all of modern sciences, which is that when you interact with a quantum state, you are able to access only one of the possibilities that are in it. So as far as intellectual speculation is concerned, Kannada was really way beyond his times, or way too sophisticated from the perspective of contemporary science.
Okay. All right. Moving on to our next slide. So, I have a question like mention of gravitation and other scientific theories is in Surya Siddhanta. There are scientific theories that were developed by Aryabhatta and Bhaskaracharya. So, but however, the critical branches of mathematics such as calculus is attributed to Isaac Newton and Leibniz. And so why you think the world has forgotten the scientists like Aryabhatta and Bhaskaracharya, and or is there a reference when Newton and Leibniz they talk about their own scientific theories?
Well, stories are generally quite nuanced and complicated. Now, clearly, the gravitation law, which is gravitation forces, the masses of two forces divided by the square of the distance between them, that goes back to Newton's time. And Newton was not the only one. There were many other physicists at that time who proposed such an inverse square law. But speaking of gravitation as a force, goes back very ancient times, not just Surya Siddhanta. It's also in Vaisheshika Sutras, where it's stated that gravitation, which in Sanskrit is called Gurutwakarshan, is one of the forces. Now, apart from Surya Siddhant, there's also Bhaskaracharya. I think you mentioned him. Yeah, you mentioned him in the slide itself, who said that the gravitational force between different objects in the skies cancels out, which is why certain objects in the sky are where they are. In other words, in contrast to Aristotle's rather simplistic ideas that everything which is made of earth and water falls to the center of the universe, which is why the earth was supposed to be at the center of the universe. This is a much more universal idea, Bhaskaracharya's claim. And the only thing that he was lacking was the inverse square law. But these ideas are very ancient, and certainly Aryabhatta's and Bhaskaracharya's work is very well known to historians of science. And so when you read these books, you will find, or books on history of science, you'll certainly find references to all of them. Aryabhatta, Bhaskaracharya, Surya Siddhanta. The reason why Surya Siddhanta doesn't get as much of credit as it's due is because apparently it was revised a few times, and therefore it's not quite clear as to what specific time location it should be pegged to. Now, what doesn't get proper credit is certainly Kannada's Vaisheshika Sutra, because I think historians of science have not really looked at it. And I think I was the first scientist to translate that. It was translated by philosophers, but who were not necessarily looking for the scientific content. And my book came out only 2016. It's a book titled Matter and Mind, where you can see both the Sanskrit original and the translation and some commentary. So it's sort of out there in front of scholars of physics only recently, but I'm quite sure sooner or later it will get the credit that it deserves.
And thanks to you, like I think you're the pioneer in bringing out all these scientists from our ancient books. All right, moving on to our next. So Bhaskaracharya, so I just want to ask you some, I have read various things and various, on the internet and books and all. So I just want to connect this. Like when we go to the temples, we have this Navagraha. So Navagraha is something like, all this Rahu, Shani, Ketu, and Guru and things like that. So basically this Navagraha is based on science and astronomy. And Bhaskaracharya is also like, he also mentioned that in Surya Siddhanta. So so the thing is, how can you relate this science, astronomy to this temples and gods?
Well, there are two sides to it. First of all, you have astronomy, which is Jyotish, and then you have astrology, which is Phala Jyotish. Now, the Navagrahas that you have at the temples are the five planets which the naked eye can see. And they are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which is Mercury is Buddha, uh, Venus is Shukra, Mars is Mangal, and Jupiter is Brihaspati, and finally Saturn is or Brihaspati or Guru, um, and Saturn is Shani.
Shani, yeah.
Now, so these are five there. And then you also have Surya and Chandrama, Sun and the Moon. And then finally, which you see, Chandrama on the right top corner and Surya right in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the two ascending nodes of the moon, because the moon waxes and wanes based on uh, how it's climbing up and down the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun across the sky from our perspective, and they are called Rahu and Ketu. So Rahu and Ketu are the ascending and descending nodes of Chandra, of the moon. So they're not separate planets in themselves, but they were pictured as grahas, because they poetically Rahu was supposed to sort of eat up Chandra, of the moon. So it Rahu and Ketu represent um, influences that the motion of the moon has on us. Because as we do know, motion of the moon also leads to high tides and low tides, right? As the moon is above us, the water goes up. That's the high tide, and we see that in all waters at sea and so on. Now, the interesting thing in astrology is, and the background to that goes back to Purusha Sukta itself, where it's said that from the cosmic mind, Chandrama Manasuhu Jataha, that Chandrama, that the physical moon was born from the mind of the cosmic Purush. Now, what does that really mean? What it means is that the minds that we have are influenced by the motions of the moon, and that's true. In fact, some experiments were done. First of all, all our cells have biological clocks, and these clocks have either uh, um, um, a period associated with the motion of the sun, or a period associated with the motion of the moon. And if you were to live in a cave without access to sunlight that is, and without clocks, you will wake up 4 minutes or 10. I think the period of the moon is 24 hours and 10 minutes. So you'll wake up 10 minutes later, and therefore your count of or lesser, 23 hours and 50 minutes. So your count of the number of days that you spend in that cave would be smaller than if you were to reset your clock every day by sunlight. So, because our clocks are reset, that's why, and because of this flexibility, that's why we are able to adjust, for example, when we travel across continents. So there are biological clocks which are associated with the phenomena in the skies, and that is all scientific. People win Nobel Prizes in this. It's called biological clocks, the theory of biological cycles. And this was known to the Vedic rishis. And in fact, you have even more complex clocks. For example, the potato's metabolic system is associated not with the period of the sun, but the period of the motion of the sun across the sky, which is sidereal. It's called the sidereal clock, which is 4 minutes less than the period of the sun, which is 23 hours and 56 minutes. So if you were to scientifically examine the potato, you'll see that its clock shifts by 4 minutes every day. So this is very interesting. But now, as far as astrology is concerned, whether we're not talking about actual effect on the lives of individuals, but rather tendencies that this might have, which is the part of Phala Jyotish or astrology that some people are interested in.
All right, that was very knowledge. I got a lot of insight on that one. Thank you. Now moving on to our next slide. So they say that Alessandro Volta invented battery and Charles F. Bush invented dynamo. But Rishi Agastya was the first one to invent the ancient portable battery, and they have shlokas and the meanings and all that. So, do you think Rishi Agastya has not got that much credit in today's scientific world?
I am not very sure of this
Okay.
because clearly, first of all, the ancients knew a lot about chemicals. India was very famous for its steel, and Indian swords were famous all over the ancient world because there were a lot of metallurgical processes in which India is very advanced. So there's also a knowledge of chemistry and so on. But where it's so maybe all this knowledge was available, but from there to connect it up to a wired system where you're delivering power to some other source requires something much more complicated and advanced, and there's got to be a proper social setting for it, or historical setting for it. I don't think there was any of that. So I think while such knowledge about what different chemicals might do in terms of creating energy of one kind or the other may have been available, but I don't think we can say, as far as I know, that there were wired systems where energy from one place was delivered to another place.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to our next slide. So it is said that Rishi Sushruta, he was the uh, pioneer in cosmetic surgery. So, like, do you have any comments on that one?
Well,
Do
this
you
is
know
certainly
about it?
true. Sushruta he did plastic surgery, for example, rhinoplasty, which is where noses were refixed. So medicine, Ayurvedic medicine was very advanced, and Sushruta clearly credit is given to him, is accepted by all historians of medicine. And likewise, Charak Samhita has a lot of amazing stuff. And in fact, and to be fair, in many ways, certainly in its logical system, Ayurveda is more advanced than even contemporary medicine. And why do I say that? Contemporary Western medicine is called allopathy. Allopathy means treatment of symptoms. And certainly, if you have serious symptoms, you should go to an allopathic doctor because then you need immediate intervention, right? You need surgery, you have injury, you have heart attack. So you go to an allopathic doctor. But for chronic illnesses, allopathy doesn't work because, for example, arthritis, etc. Because allopathy is there just to treat symptoms, and therefore, what an allopathic doctor will do is give you some chemicals, right? Give you some drugs, and which cause their own problems. And in fact, as you know, right now, in all of the US, about 25% of all Americans are using psychiatric drugs, including children, which is a huge figure. And if you look at people above the age of 50, or perhaps the number is 60% or so. So in other words, why is that happening? Because allopathic medicine does not treat the body as as a full system, which is what Ayurveda does. Ayurveda looks at balance, and therefore it looks at the body and the mind in a much more, let's say, richer system. Mind itself has three different layers. So, and mind and body are connected. This is all a part of Ayurveda. And therefore, for chronic illnesses, Ayurveda certainly offers a richer canvas for the Vaidya, for the doctor to, first of all, determine what the patient's problem is, and then come up with a resolution. And so I think, especially in the last three years, when allopathic medicine failed so catastrophically in dealing with COVID, because the fatality rate in Western countries, in Europe and the United States, far exceeded the fatality rate caused by COVID. For example, in the US, it was close to 4,000 per million. In Nigeria, it was maybe just 20 per million. Just imagine, that's a huge discrepancy. And even in India, it was only 300 or 400 per million. So I think Ayurveda.
But I just want to stop you one thing. Like you said, in Nigeria and India, they were less. So you think they were taking Ayurveda?
No,
Um,
they were not taking Ayurveda. They were using whatever conventional, they were using much more, let's say, treatment of symptoms, which Western medicine said treatment of symptoms associated with COVID, when Western medical authorities said, no, you only must do such and such and such stuff, right? Now, to come back to Ayurveda, Ayurveda is based on three doshas. Now, there is a mathematical theorem that analysis in three categories is superior to analysis by two categories. In fact, in the 1970s, they were even trying to construct computers which will process 0, 1, and 2, which means three categories rather than 0 and 1. And finally, 0 and 1 became the standard because the electronics at the basis of computers was already too much invested in binary logic. So ternary logic in terms of three, is fundamentally superior to binary logic. And Ayurveda uses ternary logic to look at the patient. And in fact, even the gunas are ternary, right? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. So that's also ternary. And the doshas, which is Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, that is a ternary thing. So fundamentally, Ayurveda has more to offer on a logical basis, and either Western medicine will have to change, and there are some efforts to change it. And right now in Western medicine, they are talking about what is called precision medicine, that we must address the medicine to the individual and not just have, these recommendations for all the population. For example, everybody and almost everybody is being recommended statins. Is that really the right thing to do? Maybe the harm done by such recommendations outweighs the benefits in general to the population. It might benefit one out of 1,000, but maybe it's harming 10 out of 1,000, right? So the overall societal harm is higher than the benefit.
all right, thank you. Moving on to the next one. So Einstein, he said that he has science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. Hinduism gives us all the benefits of religion without contracting reason and science. So in my opinion, like I'm a very open-minded person and I like to explore different things. But what I feel that Hinduism is not a religion, but science. It's so scientific. So do you have any comment on that one?
Anamika, I totally agree with you. Hinduism is perfectly consistent with science. In fact, Hinduism says there are two kinds of sciences. One is the science of the outer reality, right? Which is where we must use reason to the extent, because the outer reality is all governed by laws, physical laws. And it also says that there is Atma, which is consciousness, which transcends reality. And we are now human beings or conscious beings are both a part of the outer reality, because our body is governed by laws. And therefore, we must use logic in every sense that it is possible to use logic. But consciousness gives us freedom, potentially. And that's the part which one might call religion. But the word religion in itself only means a social group, religio, which binds people together. So religion doesn't mean knowledge. In other words, any people can form a group and say that we are following such and such prophet. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is true knowledge associated with that. While Sanatan Dharma, if Hinduism is Sanatan Dharma, Sanatan meaning perennial or eternal truths. And these eternal truths, according to Hinduism, according to the Sanatan tradition, are all subject to reasoning, are all empirically grounded, that we must question and reason. And I totally agree with you as someone who studied the Vedas and the Shastras for a long time. I can tell you that Hinduism is perfectly consistent with science. Now, there may be people who may, in their personal sadhana or in their tradition, in their sampradaya or in their community, they might say that we don't want to do this and this because we want to be bound by a certain discipline in our lives. For example, they might say that I don't want to eat garlic or whatever, whatever it might be. Those are personal vows or community vows, and they are done to impose a certain discipline on oneself. And they are not contradicting anything. So people who do this, they don't say that you shouldn't be doing it. They're just saying that you've just taken a vow for living life in a particular way. That is our jati or community way of approaching life. That's a kind of a style that you may associate. And so in other words, to go back, totally agree with you, Hinduism is totally consistent with science in every possible way.
So Einstein, always says, whenever I read about him, he says this, my purpose of scientific investigation is formed on the theories of Bhagavad Gita and all that. So you think that those Einstein would have known Sanskrit and he would have read Bhagavad Gita?
Bhagavad Gita, I don't know about this particular quote, but certainly Bhagavad Gita is available in 100,000, thousands of translations in all languages, and people have been inspired by it. Philosophers and scientists, you already mentioned Robert Oppenheimer, or even Schrödinger, who was considered one of the two creators of quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is the most fundamental physical theory there is. Without quantum mechanics, you can't have chemistry, you can't explain chemistry or biology or computers. You can't have computers if you don't know quantum mechanics. And Schrödinger himself admitted that one of the central idea of quantum mechanics came to him from the Upanishads. He also used to, Schrödinger, when he would travel, he would always travel with the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads with him. So certainly, and I would imagine with a Sanskrit original, and Schrödinger was a German-speaking person with a German translation, or people can read it in English translations or whatever. So truly, Bhagavad Gita is one of the most extraordinary texts that humanity has. And Bhagavad Gita is the greatest book on yoga. And Hinduism is ultimately the same thing as yoga. And one can set up an equation. Lived Hinduism is equivalent to yoga. Because if you look at the Vedas are these hymns related to mystery of reality, right? And the Vedas are supposed to be viewed through 6 darshanas. Darshanas meaning ways of seeing. And 5 of them are analytical, like Vedanta, what is reality, or Nyaya, what is logic, or Vaisheshika, what is physics, and Sankhya, how do systems evolve? How is the world created in the big, in the cosmic level, and also at the personal level? How is the baby created? How does consciousness arise? So 5 are analytical, but the 6th is yoga. And yoga is synthetic. Yoga is about how life is to be lived. So anybody who believes in yoga, who does yoga, not just the asanas, but the whole framework, as in the Bhagavad Gita, or as in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, or other texts, is a Hindu. is a Sanatani. Sanatani meaning somebody who believes in eternal truths. And what does the Bhagavad Gita say? Well, you can do yoga in different ways. You can have karma yoga, you have jnana yoga, you have
Yeah.
bhakti yoga,
Mhm.
and so on.
Yeah.
And so people, based on their temperament, can choose one way or the other to find the meaning of their life. It's amazing. And it's inspired some of the greatest minds in the West as well. Not just Indians, but also the greatest minds in the West have been inspired by the Bhagavad Gita.
Okay. And in US also, like yoga is very popular. Like you can see so many, my friends doing yoga and meditation is very popular here.
Well, in fact, there are some people who are claiming that possibly 20, 30, 40% of people across the world are connected to yoga, which would mean that 30, 40% of the people are really Sanatani.
Yeah.
Because what does yoga mean? Yoga means that you have your body and then you have your Atma, then you have your consciousness, right? And how do you interplay the two so that you can really find the most that you have? Now, people may not use the word Hinduism if they are doing yoga because of the colonial baggage that's been tied to Hinduism by Western writers, falsehoods related to that Hinduism is about hierarchy or this or that, which is really not true because every human being, in fact, every being has the same Atman, right? Because Atma is transcendent. It's
Mm.
not made of time and space. So everybody has the same Atma. So everybody is equal. This is, I think, the um, universal way to knowledge for all of humanity. And I think more and more of humanity, if only 30, 40% of the world is already connected to it, I think it's only going to spread in the next few decades.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to our next slide. So this is like little bit interesting that as per Surya Siddhanta, a 4th century astronomical treatise, Ujjain is geographically situated at the precise spot with 0 meridian of longitude and Tropic of Cancer intersect. That is why it is considered the navel of the earth and is called the Greenwich of India. So because of its geographical location, Ujjain should have been the GMT what it is in London right now. So, so why do you think Ujjain is not the Greenwich, and why that it is not the center point where the time should be distributed, and say 5 hours ahead of Indian Green Ujjain is America, US or Dubai or things like that. But why is it shifted? It's to London, and there is no geographical significance there.
Well, Greenwich time is the choice, as in many things, is who controls power, who controls secular power. The English ruled the waves a couple of 100 years ago, so they said we're going to count measure time according to Greenwich, right? GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. Now, in India, prior to that, it was Ujjain. You're right, because there were observatories there. It was with respect to that time that the shift in time with the motion of the sun was measured. So the choice of Greenwich is accepting the fact that the British were powerful politically, and now it's a convenient time. It's just then you just get used to it. It's like using BC and AD or BCE and CE. We say we count in from the supposed birth of Christ, birth or whatever, before Christ or after death. AD is after death, AD. Or BC. Now we don't use BC and AD. More commonly, we use BCE, before Common Era, and CE, which is Common Era. So it's just a convention that we are going to use time. We are in 2023. If you use some other calendar, for example, if you use Vikrami calendar, which is 57 years ahead of uh, of 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 the um, uh, of the of this calendar, the common era, or if you use the Kali Yuga starts at 3102 BCE. So in the Kali Yuga calendar, we would be 5,000 uh, 20, what is it, 2023 will be 5,124 year. So these things are all conventions, and it doesn't really matter now that people have gotten used to it. It's like even the beginning of the year. Beginning of the year in all ancient societies used to be with the spring. In fact, even in India, generally Navavarsha is celebrated sometime in March or April, right? Because that's when the spring begins. But
Yeah.
uh, it was I think somewhere in the Middle Ages that the beginning of the year was adjusted in Europe to January. And as you know, the months the months um, July and August were added by were corresponding to Julius Caesar and Augustus. August from Augustus. And in fact, they were only November means the ninth month, December means the 10th month, October means the eighth month, right? So all these things that have happened to calendar and time and all the rest is a reflection of certain events that occurred as far as temporal power or political power in the world was concerned.
All right. So here, Shivkar Bapuji Talpade. So he constructed an aircraft named Marut Sakha, and he flown above Bombay's Chowpatty Beach in 1895. But the first flight, we always talk about Wright brothers. So do you have anything to say? Like, do you think these great people in ancient culture has not been given proper credit?
Okay, Talapate's story, constructed aircraft, which is probably like a glider. If I don't know the whole story, maybe he flew it. But now, let's also, to be fair, acknowledge that the great Raja Bhoj, you must have heard of Raja Bhoj, and
No,
I
I
wrote a
don't know.
column on it.
Can you tell me, like, I don't know him?
Okay, Raja Bhoj was a great emperor who lived about 1,000 years ago. And I have written a column on it called Bhoj Paramar, History's Greatest Scholar King. You should look it up. It's on Medium. And you'll see that he was a great conqueror. He conquered most of North India, and he was in alliance with Rajendra Chola, who had conquered the rest of India. So the two of them almost occupied all of India. And Rajendra Chola, as you know, also sent armies or navies to Southeast Asia. So they were great conquerors. They've not gotten the credit that they deserve within India itself. Now, one of the books that Raja Bhoj did, he wrote 84 books, is on flight. And he speaks about planes which can fly and which can be powered by engines. Now, I would imagine maybe he was toying with gliders of different kinds. Now, the reason why Wright brothers get credit is because that was they were in that contraption that they had built themselves. They were riding it, and I don't think Talapade was riding the craft that he had made. So what Talpade was doing was probably similar to what Raja Bhoj in his famous book had already mentioned. And you should look it up, and you and your viewers should look it up. Bhoj Parmar and history's greatest scholar king.
All right. So my last slide is about Vedic cosmology. So here, right, I have a very vague understanding, like, they say that at this, right, we can only have this, we can only see the Mount Meru and go to the different lokas only if we have a higher consciousness. So if we don't have higher consciousness, we cannot see all this. So I have this book, like I was reading Ashish Dalal Mystic universe. And what he says that we can see that different parts of Jambu Deepa are not meant for humans, but for certain type of demigods, and entry to this part is forbidden for humans. And yet, with advanced knowledge, some humans like Arjuna have traveled to these parts to meet the celestial being. What is advanced knowledge by humans are able to travel? So basically, however, unlike the rockets which burn large amount of fuel, during launch, Arjun travels by power of mantra, which implies that he overcame gravity by mantra and went to places that cannot be sensually perceived. So he used mantras, and he went to all these lokas, and he got all those arms and ammunition to fight in the Mahabharata. So can you a little bit talk about this Vedic cosmology and yeah, in general?
Well, in the Siddhantas, which are astronomy books from India, there's no mention of any of this, ocean of salt water or sugarcane syrup, etc., etc. So they only speak about, the sun, the Mercury, Venus, Earth, etc. And they give Aryabhatta himself, since his name came up, gives the motions of the outer planets with respect to the sun and the inner planets with respect to the Earth. And so maybe that was a part heliocentric model. Okay. Now, what about these lokas, right? Jambudvipa, etc. Now, you come across them in the Puranas. And the Puranas are not speaking about the outer reality of the cosmos, which is what the Siddhantas talk about. They speak about, a mapping of that outer reality into the mind. And I have in one paper argued that these notions of Swaraloka, Swar meaning, of course, the sun. Now, these were motions of the planets which in themselves were viewed in one's imagination as a whole loka. There are this, if you were to imagine that these periods are concentric, then you have the motion of, and you look at the earth as the center in your mind's eye, in Purana, not in the Siddhantas, not in astronomy books. Now, this is the impact that they might have on you. So you look at earth as the center because your body is at the center. And then there's a gap, then there's a motion of the closest is the moon. Then after that, you have the Mercury, which has a period of 88 days. The moon has a period of 28 days. Mercury has a period of 88 days. Then you have Shukra or Venus, which has a period of 225 days, and so on. So these were a symbolic mapping and not physical cosmology. Because, part of the difficulty that a lot of people have in understanding the Puranas is that they insist that Puranas are to be looked at literally. Sometimes what is being done is to symbolically map what is being experienced within into a mind space, if you will. So this is a mind cosmography. This is not the physical universe. You see that? The physical universe was described very accurately as possible at that time, more accurately than by any other civilization in the Siddhantas, like Aryabhatta or Brahmagupta or Bhaskaracharya and others, or Surya Siddhanta itself. So, this is now, of course, Jambudvip is Jambu is also the name for Jambudvip is the nation for Earth, for India. Jambu is Jamun, the fruit Jamun, the land of the Jambu or Jamun, of the blackberries. That is Earth. So what is perceived as this? Jambu Dweep is on one side. This is another conception in the Puranas. In the middle, you have Mount Meru, and that's because the Earth is spinning. So the axis was viewed as Mount Meru, and that was the mountain somewhere near Kashmir or just north of Kashmir.
Mount Kailasha, they say, axis.
Or now Mount Kailasha, or maybe somewhere north of Kashmir, or Mount Kailasha, right? And the reason behind that is just as our consciousness is the center of our universe. If you close your eyes, nothing exists excepting your consciousness, right? And that's why Shiva is viewed, Shiva is consciousness. Maheshwara, even the Bhagavad Gita calls your consciousness as Ishvara, right? Or Maheshwara. So that is the axis. And that's one reason why Shiva is shown as this, as in the form, Shivlinga, the form of an axis. And in fact, in Atharva Veda, it's even stated that this axis is as large, as infinite, that you can't reach its two ends. So since the earth rotates, so it is viewed that Mount Meru is the center, which was viewed as somewhere, Mount Kailasa, because Shiva himself is also the axis of consciousness, and therefore he's living in the outside world on the axis around which the earth is rotating. You see that?
Mhm.
So it was viewed, the earth was also viewed as four leaves. The one south of Mount Meru was the leaf corresponding to Jambu Dweep, which is earth. And then there was one on the east, which is where China and Japan was. On the west, which is where the Central Asia and Middle East was. And on the north was the wasteland of Siberia and so on. So these were all, imagined mindscapes, if you will, or mind cosmographies, to relate the structure of the inner cosmos to a corresponding imagined cosmos. So they're not to be viewed as the physical universe, because all the sages, all the astronomers from India viewed the outer reality the way it is, as the sun, the moon, the various planets, and Earth in their different motions. And in fact, what's beautiful is that they also perceive that there are many such solar systems, and therefore there are many such Earth systems. So they said, if you have an Indra in this our solar system, there are many other such Indras as well. So
Multiverse.
not multiverse, but really multiplicity of possibilities of Earth-like planets in the universe. So our Earth was not the center of the universe, because the universe was viewed as being ananta, as infinite, and there were other places as well.
All right. Thank you, sir. I really enjoyed talking to you. So, do you have any final comments for my viewers of the Atman Show?
I would only reiterate what you said in the beginning, which is that the Sanatan tradition is perfectly consistent with science, and consistent with both the outer science of the outer reality. So it accepts everything that uh, scientific enterprise has provided and will provide, but it provides something deeper than what contemporary science has as far as the inner reality is concerned. Because as we know, Western science, or the Western tradition of science, doesn't accept the concept of Atman. In Western science, you only have physical body, and then because of the interconnections in the brain, you have consciousness. But it can't explain. In fact, all of its efforts to find how consciousness arises have failed, because whatever is there in the brain can be mapped into mathematics, right? Potentially it can be. If you had huge reams of mathematics, how would writing that mathematics suddenly create consciousness? That's impossible. So it cannot do so. And the Vedas, the Sanatan tradition, offers something. First of all, it accepts all of Western science, because that is logical. The Veda says the physical universe is governed by laws. So whatever you perceive is perfectly fine. But then it provides something much deeper and beautiful, which is that you have consciousness, and you might want to call it Shiva, or you might want to call it Purushottama or Krishna or the Devi or whatever. And this is where creativity comes from. Creativity does not come from the mind. That mind and Atma are two separate things. Atma is a machine-like. That's why in the Sanatan tradition, Atma is also called Antahakaran, inner instrument. It's machine-like. It's governed by laws. But Atma is not. Manas is governed by laws. Atma is free. And all of Sanatan tradition is to help every individual turn to that potential of freedom and creativity that resides within each person. So it's not just knowing things, it's also a path of self-discovery and self-knowledge. And in the coming few decades, as AI devastates society as we know it, as jobs disappear, and robots do what is mechanical work, and AI does what is intellectual work, the final challenge, the final frontier would be the frontier of consciousness. And that is what Sanatan is all about. And I think the future, more and more people in all corners of the world will turn to Sanatan to find answers to the mystery of their existence and the mystery of this universe.
All right. Thank you, sir. Have a nice day and bye.
Thank you, Anamika.